The small rural town of Briarfield sat at the edge of the world, a place where time seemed to crawl and secrets clung to the wind like the whisper of a forgotten legend. Tucked away in the farthest corner of the town was the old Carter house, weathered and worn by decades of isolation. It was a home that had seen countless years and witnessed many storms, but none as violent as the one about to descend upon it. Ethan Carter was an ordinary boy by all outward appearances, 12 years old, with a curious nature that often got him into trouble. He spent most of his days exploring the woods that bordered the town, chasing after the fleeting wonders of nature that fascinated him. The trees had always been his companions, and the creatures of the forest his silent audience. But there was one secret Ethan had yet to understand: the true nature of his grandfather, Samuel Carter. Samuel was an imposing figure, tall and gaunt, with weathered skin that spoke of a lifetime spent under the harshest conditions. His eyes, however, were the most unsettling aspect of him, a cold, silver gleam that carried an unsettling wisdom. The townsfolk whispered that Samuel had once been a great man, a protector of sorts, but that was before his fall. The stories told of strange happenings, of unexplained disappearances in the woods, and of the strange creature that haunted the moonlit nights. But to Ethan, Samuel was simply Grandpa, a man who told him stories of ancient times and taught him how to navigate the forest, just as his father had done before him. What Ethan didn't know was that Samuel's past was far darker than any of the old tales suggested. Samuel had carried the curse of the werewolf for decades, a secret he kept buried deep within the walls of his home. The beast inside him was a force of nature, an ancient power passed down through generations, and it was only under the full moon that Samuel became something else. The Werew arrived without warning, as they always did, silent, calculating, and deadly. They were an alien race, long known throughout the galaxy as the deadliest assassins in existence. Their mission was simple: eliminate any threat to the galactic order. The Werew had no interest in human politics, no regard for the lives of Earth's inhabitants. They were hired killers, and their target was the one thing they feared most: power. The Werew had received a tip, one from a source high in the Galactic Command, indicating that a child on Earth was tied to an ancient power. This child, they believed, was the key to unlocking a threat that could destabilize the universe. Their intelligence was based on fragments of ancient texts and cryptic prophecies, speculations that led them to the small town of Briarfield, where they believed the child would be found. The boy, Ethan Carter, had no idea that his existence was a thread that tied him to a much greater conflict. The assassins arrived under the cover of night, cloaked in shadows and blending into the very air itself. They were ghosts, predators who could not be seen by the naked eye. Their ship, a sleek and imposing craft, hovered silently above the Carter house, its dark hull blending perfectly with the cloudless sky. From within, the Werew watched as Ethan played outside, laughing in the fading light of the evening. They studied him with cold, calculating eyes, certain that they had found their target. But what they didn't know was the depth of the threat they were about to face. They knew nothing of the werewolf who guarded this boy, the beast who had stalked these lands for decades. They had come to eliminate a child, but they had no idea that they were walking into the lair of a predator far beyond their comprehension. As Ethan ran through the woods, his bare feet brushing against the cool earth, a strange chill filled the air. He paused, looking over his shoulder, sensing something lurking in the shadows. He had always been in tune with the forest, but tonight something felt off, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. His heart pounded in his chest, but he brushed the feeling aside, attributing it to his overactive imagination. He hadn't yet learned the true dangers that stalked these woods. The Werew moved with the precision of seasoned killers, their cloaks blending with the night. They had no need to rush. Every step was calculated, every motion deliberate. They could take their time, ensuring that the boy would not escape. Their objective was clear, and nothing would deter them from completing the mission. They had been trained for this. Ethan's grandfather, Samuel, stood on the porch of the house, his sharp eyes scanning the dark horizon. Something was wrong. A sudden unease gnawed at him, a primal instinct that he had long buried beneath years of control. He could sense it, the presence of something foreign, something unnatural. The scent of the air had changed, and his instincts screamed at him to act. But tonight was different. He had promised Ethan that he would never let the boy know the truth, that the monsters of the world were not just stories. Samuel had spent his life protecting Ethan from the beast within, but he knew that tonight he might not be able to contain it. The moment Samuel had feared most had come. Ethan wandered further into the woods, oblivious of the fate that awaited him. He had no idea that the shadows that followed him weren't merely creatures of the forest, but beings from another world. It wasn't until he heard a faint sound, the swish of something moving through the trees, that he realized he was not alone. He spun around, eyes wide with confusion, but before he could react, the Werew were upon him. The alien assassins moved quickly, their lethal precision a blur as they surrounded the boy. Ethan barely had time to scream before one of them grabbed him, silencing his cry with a swift, chilling strike. The Werew, unaware of the true nature of the boy's family, saw him only as a means to an end. Their cold logic had led them here, and they would not be swayed by sentiment or emotion. Ethan's life had been snuffed out before he even understood what was happening. Samuel heard the faint echo of his grandson's scream, carried on the wind. His heart stopped. The beast inside him stirred, but Samuel held it back with all his strength. He raced towards the woods, knowing that he was too late, that the assassin's hand had already claimed Ethan's life. The woods, once his sanctuary, were now a battlefield, a place where the hunter had become the hunted. In the distance, the Werew stood over Ethan's lifeless body, preparing to vanish into the night, their mission complete. They had no idea of the storm they had unleashed. Samuel Carter stepped from the shadows, his eyes glowing with a silvery light that only the Werew would recognize, the sign of the beast within him. The assassins paused, their hands twitching toward their weapons, sensing something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. They had come to eliminate a child, but they had not counted on facing a creature older than the stars themselves. The hunt had begun. Samuel Carter stood still in the cold embrace of the night, his muscles taut with rage, every inch of his being screaming for release. The faintest tremor ran through his body as he gazed at the lifeless form of his grandson, lying just a few yards away from him. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering the secrets of the world, as though the forest itself was mourning. Yet, the only sound Samuel could hear was a hammering of his own heartbeat, a drumming that seemed to echo across the woods like a warning. The assassins, Werew, hadn't even flinched when they saw him. Perhaps they hadn't understood the full magnitude of the situation. Perhaps they didn't realize who they had just killed. To them, Ethan was just another target, another cog in the wheel of their cold, calculated mission. But Samuel knew better. He had spent a lifetime concealing the beast that lurked inside him, a force of nature that no alien assassin, no galactic entity could ever understand. The moonlight shone to the canopy, casting long shadows that twisted and danced across the forest floor. It was almost as if the very world around them recognized the moment. It held its breath. "Leave him." Samuel's voice was low, hoarse, yet laced with a power that seemed to reverberate through the trees. He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. The Werew eyed him with curiosity, their dark, featureless forms standing in eerie silence. They knew of creatures like him, beasts from the midst of countless worlds, but they had never faced one up close. Samuel was not merely a man, not any longer. He was the werewolf, an ancient creature with the strength of 100 men and the savage instincts of the wild. The air grew thick with tension, the only movement the faint sway of the trees in the wind. The Werew were professional, their training honed over centuries of assassination and bloodshed. They had killed countless beings, each more dangerous than the last, but none had ever felt like this primal energy emanating from the man standing before them. Samuel could feel the beast awakening inside him, its hunger pulling at the very fabric of his soul. The moon, full and heavy, called to him with an irresistible pull. He resisted it with all his strength, but it was no use. His body began to tremble, his skin itching as the transformation began. The change was violent, tearing through his flesh with a brutal force that sent waves of pain cascading through his spine. His bones cracked and reformed, his muscles swelling as the beast took over. His hands elongated into monstrous claws, each one sharp enough to slice through steel. His face shifted, his jaw elongating, teeth growing into fangs as sharp as daggers. His eyes, once silver, now burned with an unearthly fire, glowing like twin moons in the darkness. The sound of the transformation was deafening, cracking, shifting, breaking, but the Werew remained still, watching with a cold, detached interest. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated the sheer power that coursed through his veins, the centuries of rage and pain that had been suppressed, waiting for a moment like this. With a roar that shook the very ground beneath him, Samuel Carter, the werewolf, fully emerged. His once human form was now a towering, hulking creature, covered in fur as dark as the night itself. His body exuded raw power, his senses heightened beyond anything the Werew could comprehend. He could smell their fear, their hesitation, and it only drove him further into his madness. One of the Werew made a move, reaching for a sleek weapon at their side. The motion was fluid, practiced, but it was too slow. Samuel was faster, his enhanced reflexes moving in a blur. He lunged forward with terrifying speed, slashing through the air with his claws. The assassin never stood a chance. The Werew weapon was torn from their hands, and before they could react, Samuel's claws dug deep into their chest, the force of the blow sending the alien flying back into a tree. The assassin crumpled to the ground, motionless. Samuel didn't pause. The others were already moving, their cloaks blending into the night like shadows. They were quick, but Samuel was faster, more lethal. The forest around them was alive with movement, the trees whispering of the impending bloodshed. His senses were heightened, every rustle, every shift of the wind guiding his actions. He felt the presence of the remaining assassins, as if they were an extension of his own body. They tried to scatter, to surround him, but they had no idea how to fight something like him. They weren't dealing with a mere man. They were facing something far older, far more dangerous. Samuel moved like a blur through the woods, his massive form tearing through the underbrush. The Werew didn't stand a chance. One by one they fell. His claws sliced through them with brutal efficiency, and in mere moments, the forest was filled with the bodies of the assassins, each one lying still in the dirt, their lives snuffed out as if they were nothing more than insects. The last of the Werew stood their ground, their weapon drawn. They were not afraid, not yet. They were trained to fight, to survive, but even they could sense the overwhelming power of the beast before them. Samuel's eyes burned with an unholy fire, and his growls reverberated through the trees, a warning. The assassin hesitated, their hand trembling slightly as they aimed the weapon at him. "I will not kill you." Samuel's voice was guttural, filled with primal fury. "But if you harm another living thing, you will know pain like no other." The assassin's resolve wavered, and in that split second, Samuel charged. His massive form collided with the Werew like a tidal wave, sending the assassin crashing into a nearby tree with a sickening thud. The weapon flew from their hand, its power nothing compared to the raw strength of the werewolf. The assassin groaned, struggling to rise, but Samuel's eyes bore into them with a cold fury. He stood over the alien, his shadow casting a long and terrifying silhouette against the forest floor. The Werew tried to speak, to reason, but their words were lost in the growl that rumbled from Samuel's throat. In a swift motion, Samuel grabbed the assassin by the throat, lifting them off the ground as though they weighed nothing. Their eyes widened in terror, and for the first time, the Werew assassin realized the gravity of their mistake. "You don't understand," Samuel said through clenched teeth. "You were never meant to kill him. His voice was both monstrous and human, an eerie combination of fury and sorrow. With a single, violent motion, he slammed the assassin into the ground, knocking the wind from their lungs. The Veether struggled to rise, but it was too late. Samuel had already claimed his vengeance. The battle was over. The forest fell silent once more, save for the sounds of Samuel's heavy breathing. His transformation had begun to recede, the beast within him settling back into its dormant state. The rage that had driven him was beginning to fade, leaving only the emptiness of loss. He glanced down at the body of his grandson, the only thing that had ever kept him tethered to humanity. Ethan's innocence was now lost, taken away by these cold, merciless killers. Samuel knelt beside Ethan's body, his massive hands trembling as he gently lifted the boy. His heart was heavy, weighed down by the loss of something irreplaceable. For all his power, all his strength, there was nothing he could do to bring the boy back. And in that moment, Samuel Carter knew one thing for certain. The Veether had made a grave mistake. The war they had started was only just beginning. And this time, the beast would not be the one hunted. The moon hung high in the night sky, a silver sentinel casting its cold light over the desolate forest. Samuel Carter stood still, his massive frame outlined against the darkened trees, his chest heaving with labored breaths. The rage that had fueled his transformation was now gone, replaced by a searing emptiness that gnawed at his very soul. The boy, his grandson, the last piece of humanity that had kept him grounded, was gone. The assassins, the cold-blooded hunters who had come to Earth to end him, had succeeded in their mission. They had killed an innocent, and now they would pay the price. Samuel had never allowed himself to succumb to the beast. He had kept it chained within him for years, using his mind and willpower to control it. But tonight, the beast had been unleashed, and there would be no going back. The Veether had made the mistake of thinking that they could kill without consequence. They had killed the wrong man's kin. They had killed someone who had the power to end them all. The night was thick with tension. Samuel's mind was a storm, swirling with grief and fury. The sound of wind rustling through the trees seemed distant, as though it were part of another world. In this world, there was only the cold, the vengeance, and the relentless pursuit of those who had taken everything from him. His fists clenched, and the raw power of the werewolf surged through him once more. His senses sharpened every sound, every movement of air, every distant crack of a branch was amplified to an unbearable degree. He could feel them. He could feel the remaining Veether. They were out there, somewhere, watching him, waiting for him to make a move. They had underestimated him before, but now they would learn what it meant to face the full fury of the beast. The Veether had failed to kill him, and in doing so, had sealed their fate. Samuel knew their strength, their training, their cold, efficient methods. But it had all been for nothing. They had killed the wrong person, the wrong family. They had awakened something far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. For years, Samuel had fought to remain human, to suppress the beast within him. But now, the beast was his only ally, and it was not merciful. It did not care about the details of battle or the reasons for vengeance. It only knew one thing: kill. In the distance, Samuel caught the faintest hint of movement. A shadow flitted between the trees, and his eyes snapped toward it. There, one of the Veether, their dark silhouette barely distinguishable from the forest, was making its way through the underbrush. Samuel's heart quickened, and with a snarl, he was off, moving with the speed and precision of a predator. His body, no longer human, moved with the fluid grace of a true hunter. The assassin didn't hear him coming. It never did. Samuel was on him in an instant, his claws tearing through the air. The Veether turned, their weapon drawn, but it was too late. Samuel's jaws clamped around the alien's throat with brutal force, and the creature's scream was cut off as he crushed its windpipe. The assassin struggled, thrashing weakly, but there was no escaping the strength of the werewolf. Samuel's claws dug into the assassin's chest, ripping through armor and bone alike, until the alien's body went limp in his grasp. Samuel tossed the body aside, his bloodied hands trembling with the force of his fury. He could smell the other Vether nearby, their scent masking the air with their unnatural musk. They had heard the battle, and now they were moving to intercept him. But they were too slow, too confident. Another figure appeared, this one larger, more menacing than the rest. A leader. Samuel's eyes locked onto the Vether, and he could feel the challenge in the air. This was the one who had orchestrated the attack, the one who had sent his kin to kill his family. The leader's eyes met Samuel's, and for a brief moment, there was understanding, an understanding that Samuel Carter was no mere man. He was a force, a storm that could not be contained. The Vether leader drew its weapon, a sleek, alien gun that hummed with deadly energy. It aimed the weapon at Samuel, and in the same instant, Samuel leapt into the air, his claws extended, his jaws wide. The gun fired, the blast ripping through the air, but Samuel was already upon the leader, his massive form colliding with the Vether with a deafening crash. The alien was knocked backward, and the weapon clattered to the ground. But it was no use. Samuel was faster, stronger, and the Vether leader was no match for the full force of the werewolf's rage. With one swipe of his claws, Samuel ripped the leader's chest open, spilling its insides across the forest floor. The leader's final breath was a gurgling rasp as it tried to say something, perhaps a warning, perhaps a plea. But Samuel was beyond hearing. The leader's reign was over. The last of the Vether had fallen. But even as the body of the leader crumpled to the earth, Samuel's fury did not subside. The hunger that had driven him was far from satisfied. The blood of his enemies stained the ground, but it was not enough. He needed to feel their lives extinguished with his own hands. He needed to see their bodies broken, their existence erased. The remaining assassins were closing in, but Samuel was not afraid. The beast had spoken. It had claimed its revenge, but now it would finish what it had started. He could hear their footsteps, their breathing. He could feel their presence like an itch at the back of his mind. They were close, and it would be the end for them. Another assassin emerged from the trees, its face twisted in a snarl, its hands clutching a bladed weapon. It lunged at Samuel, but the werewolf was already moving. With a roar, Samuel swiped at the Vether with all the force of a storm. The assassin's weapon shattered upon impact, and before it could react, Samuel's claws were buried deep in its chest. He twisted, and the assassin crumpled to the ground, his body twitching in a final, futile effort to fight back. The forest was silent again, save for Samuel's heavy breathing. He stood among the corpses of the Vether, his body heaving with the remnants of his transformation. He had unleashed the beast, and in doing so, he had delivered his vengeance. But even as the adrenaline faded, there was no relief, no peace, only emptiness. He turned toward the clearing where Ethan's body lay, the boy who had been his anchor to a world long forgotten, the boy whose life had been taken so callously, so without meaning. Samuel fell to his knees beside him, his massive form shaking with grief. The vengeance had been sweet, but it had not brought his grandson back. There was nothing that could undo what had been done. With a final mournful howl, Samuel Carter stood tall, his rage exhausted, his vengeance complete. He had killed, and in doing so, he had destroyed the ones who had wronged him. But the cost was too great. The beast had taken its toll, and there was nothing left but the hollow ache of loss. The night would soon give way to dawn, but for Samuel, the war was over. There would be no more battles, no more enemies. There would only be the memory of the boy he had lost, and the quiet, unyielding forest that had borne witness to it all.